Broadcasting live from Youngville, North Carolina and Ontario, Canada. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly show where Vicky Rowe and AJ Airmans bring you the mead news, meadery info, and mead-making discussions from all over, talking with mead makers, mead owners, industry mavens, and influencers. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly podcast about mead and the people who love it and where the mead world is going. And now here are your hosts, Got Mead owner Vicky Rowe and mead and wine maker AJ Airmans.
Live from the den of the Puppies of the Apocalypse, a bunny pen in Ottawa, Canada, Melbourne down under, and Ryan's Pad in Denver, it's Got Mead Live. Welcome to the show. We've had a week's hiatus while I ran away to Disney to pretend like I wasn't grown up for a week. So that was kind of fun. I had a pretty good time. And I found Mead at Disney. Yay! Anyway, we're back tonight, and we're talking. Ryan's coming on. He's going to be talking about. Well, we're all going to be talking about how to create your own mead recipes, because the number one question we see on the forums and on all the social media groups is, hey, can you give me your recipe? What's the recipe for X? So we're going to talk about how you can, make your own custom recipes, because no matter what recipe anybody gives to you, it's going to be different than the way it comes out for them, because the honey varietal is always different. The year or time of year the honey came out, that's different. The fruit is going to be from a different region. There's so many things that can be changed. So we're going to have you, help you figure out how you're going to do that, so that you can, always come up with something that works best for what you have or what you want to make. So those of you that have signed up for either 3-month or longer subscriptions as a Got Mead patron, we really appreciate it. That goes to help support the site, to support the show, and keep things going. So thank you so much. There was quite a few people over the last week, and I just wanted to get out there and say, huge thanks. It's very much appreciated. Of course, we do this on our own because we're crazy mead nuts like y'all. And the thing is, though, is of course the software, hardware, storage, all that costs money. So we appreciate you helping to keep that going on, so I don't have to keep taking it out of my pocket. We would like to be able to upgrade. So if you'd like to see us upgrade, and you're not already a patron, please consider becoming one. It's only $30 a year. You get access to Got Mead's patron forum boards. You get access to Got Mead's patron Facebook group, and of course, you're helping to support the site. So for a little over 50 cents a week, you get some good stuff, you help support the site, and we can keep growing and providing information that will hopefully help you to make better mead. So if you want to track us down online, of course, gotmead.com is the main website, and we run the show live through the website, so you can find the player if you just click Got Mead Live. If, however, you prefer to listen to us later and you want to catch us on your commute or at work or pretending to work or whatever it is that you're doing in the house, you can check us out on Spreaker, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher, and you can, of course, also find us on gotmead.com. Replays go back to the beginning of the show, and just go there, search Got Mead Live, and it'll pop right up. On the gotmead.com site, it's going to be just click Got Mead Live Radio Show, takes you right to the player. That's always going to have what our latest, most recent show is, and there's a link underneath that to take you to the list of all of the shows, all the way back to the beginning. So check it out if you haven't already. On Facebook, you can find us at facebook.com/gotmead, and our main group is facebook.com/groups/gotmead. On Twitter, we are at GotMeadNow. If you can't call us, feel free to tweet us. I'm usually watching the feed during the show, unless we get really involved, and then sometimes I'm not paying as much attention as I probably should. So apologies if I don't respond right away. I try. If you want to send us a question, feel free to go to gotmead.com, put your mouse over Got Mead Live Radio Show. There'll be a drop down. Click that drop down. That'll take you to a question form. You can send us questions that you want to have answered on the show, or people you'd like to see come on the show. We are interested in all of that stuff. And of course, if Skype is cooperating, you can try to call us at 803-443-MEAD. That's 803-443-6323. Whew, ha! I don't think I took a breath during all of that. All right, so on to more important things. What are we drinking?
Well, I've got Ryan's Bochet, actually, and I'm finding the more I have this, the more I like it, and I'm going to be really, really sorry when I hit the end of this bottle. Right now, it's so aromatic. I've got the glass sitting at arm's length, and I can smell it. It's amazing.
Is it that 16% stuff you got to be really
Dear.
careful with or it'll kill you?
It's just labeled Bochet, so I'm
Ah,
guessing so.
yeah. Ryan's killer
You
mead.
guys should know by now my session meads start at 16, right?
Nice.
Gives whole
That's
new-
not exactly true, but like probably most of us, when we first start out, we start making higher alcohols, and as we age a little bit or mature as a maker, I think we start to wind that in some for at least quite a bit of different things. But yeah, I suspect I made that about 3 years ago, so
Okay.
I suspect that's at least 16, maybe more.
Well, it's very, very pleasant, and I think being in sort of a half a bottle at this point, the very faint amount of oxidation that it's starting to pick up is just, it's really enhancing things. It's really nice.
No, well, great. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that.
I love it when a little oxidation helps, and
Yeah.
and creates a different mead that's just as good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it gives a perception of a little bit more sweetness without actually being more sweet.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Well, if you think about it,
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say I like oxidation in ciders. Or in ciders. I find that it adds character, and not a lot, obviously, not a lot of oxidation, but some.
Well, and actually, the way that I kind of look at it, it's certainly not a BJCP category in and of itself by any means. But I actually do, and what part of what we're going to do tonight, we'll get into this a little bit maybe. I actually consider some meads that I think will do well with that little bit of an aged profile, a little bit of oxidation, little sherry notes maybe, or at least we've allowed it to get a personality that it's been around for a little while. And then there's other meads that I think, at least I do, and I know many of my friends do as well. We think that by design or by intention, we want this to be very, very, very fresh and fruity, and the juice dripping down in your forearm kind of thing. And so I actually kind of see it as two completely different approaches to making meads, and by design, some of them are made one direction and some of them are made the other. And I think if you guys remind me, or if it's of anybody's interest, we can certainly talk about that later down the road too.
Okay. Well, I'm drinking a cider tonight. Acoustic Meads Rock Steady Red Hard Cider. It's a berry cider with berries, and it's got all this red berry notes like raspberries and cherries, and it's when you taste it, it's a nice clean, clear taste with a lot of berry, a lot of apple, and it's just a nice tangy finish. It's fairly straightforward, not super complex, blah 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 blah, not super complex, and just an easy drinker. I really like it. Thank God he puts it in beer bottles, or I'd be in trouble. And Acoustic Mead is acousticmead.com. They're in Traverse City, Michigan. So you Michigander types, check them out. Some good stuff.
Oh, it's my turn, is it?
Yeah, it is. Pay attention.
He was waiting for me, and I was waiting for him.
Okay.
I'm looking at making a ginger mead and developing a recipe for it at the moment. So I've been drinking copious amounts of ginger beer from all different varieties, and today I have one here that I'm trying again, just to take some notes and decide what exactly I'm looking for.
Cool. I'd like to make a mead that kind of goes around like the Bundaberg creaming soda. Anyway, go Ryan.
Well, so I'm running late. I'm actually trying to stuff a little bit more dinner in my face while you guys are talking, and I haven't even gotten. I have an empty glass right next to me, and I'm looking at several different things within arm's reach that I can grab. a good friend of mine sent me a love package about a couple weeks ago, and in that there was a absolutely wonderful mead called it's from Superstition. It's called Truffleophagus.
Ooh, really?
And it's just absolutely amazing. I think part of why I like it so much is that I kind of have at least the same mentality that I think this mead was approached in. I like to have a lot of mystery. So a lot of active parts and pieces in the mead, but none of them stand out so much that they tell you what they are. And so you're going, oh my God, this has got so many different things going on in it, and it takes you a while to kind of chew on it, and slowly or maybe quickly, depending on how well defined your palate is, you start to pull out different fractions of it. And I just love this. I think it's quite difficult to get, a handful or more of moving parts that all blend really well with each other. And this, without a doubt, is probably one of the best meads I've had in a long time. And I also, which I don't normally do, but I bought into John Talkington's Mead Club, and this last shipment, also being the first shipment, there's a mead in there. They're all very good, by the way, you guys. But there's a mead in there made with chestnut honey. And apparently, talking to John, he said that the European guys feel enlarged that you can't make a good mead out of chestnut honey. I don't know if their chestnut's different than what John has. I have no idea in that regard, but John has just absolutely nailed this. And so I know without a doubt I'll be tugging on a little bit of both of those bottles. And then I'm also a Scotch and bourbon connoisseur, so to speak, and I've got a nice bottle of Monkey Shoulder here that I'm probably going to graduate to closer to the end of the show.
So we'll know when you get to that when you start to slur,
right? I hate that when you're conscious, you're aware enough that your words are starting to slur, and you try very hard to keep them all together.
I know.
And I don't know about you. I know I talked
to your stuff.
Right. Well, I think, I don't know, I've talked to a lot of mead makers that make mead all the time, and I think we're a different breed in as much as that, well, for a while I struggled when I first started. I found myself, because I always have a whole lot of different batches going on, I would find myself at, 10 o'clock in the morning taking a little sip of this and that, and kind of feeling it out. Where's this at, and where do I think I need to go? And it almost seems like when you've got it in your house and you drink it every day. And I struggled with that. I found out a while back that they say if you drink a beer, just a single beer every day when you come home from work, that you're an alcoholic. Well, I won't lie. I might have 2 days a week that I don't drink anything. And rarely do I get a good buzz where I do, start to get slurry. But I do drink something every day, probably mostly because I have, guys, I probably have 60 gallons of active stuff going on right now, with another 100 sitting around that are aging. And
well, you gotta drink.
So,
I mean, if you don't drink it, you're gonna have it back. You're gonna have a stockpile like I end up with.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, now I have that. It's over at my brother's house in his basement because I don't have any room anymore. But it's just not unusual, I think, for us to drink all the time. And as you know, then your tolerance level goes up. And I was kind of going, am I an alcoholic? I do drink a little bit of mead every day. And so I stopped for a little bit, and that was easy. And I thought, I don't really have a problem. And this is a joke, and some of you guys that have known me for a while know that I've said this before, is that I don't have a drinking problem. I have a fermentation problem.
Oh, yeah, right there with you. I got a brewing problem.
Yeah, for sure. My responsibilities are sometimes way out of whack when you look at all the money that I spend on honey and making mead. And I don't know. They say you can look at your calendar and look at your paycheck and know what your priorities are, and it's pretty clear at my house.
I think you Americans have a definition problem with what you consider an alcoholic. That's just insane.
Well, I
Because
ran
I think
through
you guys drink quite a lot more than we do, don't you? In large, Hamish, as one culture
Yes,
compared to
maybe.
another.
It's a lot more acceptable for us anyway.
Well, I
Yeah.
ran through
So-
the Alcoholics Anonymous checklist, and it says if you answer 2 questions, yes, you might be alcoholic. If you answer more than that, you are. And I answered at least 6 questions, yes, but I'm a binge drinker. That's what happens. I'm only an alcoholic when I'm drunk, so as long as I don't get drunk, I'm fine. And
Right.
that's been working for me for, a decade or 2 now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you'd
don't like
fit in
getting
over
drunk.
with Hamish's part of the world, then, won't you?
Yeah. I don't like getting drunk
3
either.
drinks max, that's it.
Yeah.
I like
drink-
getting
Yeah.
drunk, but the problem is I can't stop, so I just don't do it anymore. And I've managed to survive 2 Mazer cups without actually getting drunk. So,
It hurts too much to get.
Yeah.
It hurts too much the next day
Oh,
after
God,
the drunk. I
hangovers, yeah.
can't. No, I just can't anymore. Besides, I have found that I don't know what the hell the blood thinners do to my blood, but they've screwed me up to the point where if I have more than 1 or 2 drinks, I develop a huge, massive headache. I feel awful, and it's like, well, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I like
Well,
I
yeah,
like having drinks, and I like being able to go to the Mazer and taste a lot of different things. But lately, it hasn't been working out so good for me.
oh, I absolutely adore, what's her name? Annie's Little Thimble. That is the perfect size of tasting cup. It's it's a thimble. It's awesome. Just
Isn't
enough
it
for a
amazing
taste.
how? Go ahead.
It's just enough for a taste, because that's really all she wants, and I'm in the same boat. Make a really, really small pour. Once it starts flowing, stop,
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm gonna regret it. Because I'm to the point with
You
my
know-
alcohol tolerance where now I can get a hangover without ever getting drunk. So what's the point anymore?
Right. And I'm in the same boat. If I drink enough to get a buzz, then I've already drinking enough to have a headache for sure.
Mm.
You know what I find interesting is just about every Sunday my son comes over, and typically we ride our bicycles for many miles up mountain passes and all that kind of stuff on Sundays, and then come home and we'll kind of snuggle down and start tasting a bunch of things. And as you all know, there's some people that drink alcohol, and then there's other people that approach it with a different attitude. It's amazing to me how just we can spend 20 minutes on a 1 ounce pour of a mead, just smelling it and getting all the aromas and everything first. And then we sip like the smallest little tiny eyedropper worth of mead about 10 times. And you can actually spend half an hour or more on a 1 ounce pour and still have 3/4 of the ounce left over,
Yep.
before you move on to something else. And then other people, you hand them some and it's gone, and they don't even have a clue what they tasted because they didn't spend any time to taste anything.
Yeah, there's tasting and there's drinking, I guess.
Well, and we kind of typically by the time he goes home, I've got 20 or more partial little shots of stuff here and there, and so then you don't ever want to throw that away, right? Now, one of the ways that I learned how I said to myself at one point, when I didn't care how much crap I was throwing away after I racked, that goo kind of crap that you can't really rescue down at the bottom of your carboy, I said, I'll know I'm a mazer or mead maker, pardon me, when I can throw that stuff away without even thinking about it. And in some ways that's kind of true. At some point you just go, you know what, that stuff's not even worth the bother, and you just toss it. But I still seem to want to finish all the 25 little glasses after he goes home.
I find all the remnants in the bottles, and I don't always remember to finish them later, and sometimes they end up, I'll take a little sip, and they're like, oh my god, that went sideways, and dump it down the sink,
Oh, yeah. I don't find that very much. I suspect I've probably got 2 cases of open bottles that, are sitting around here being consumed here and there, and I don't really find that mead goes that bad very quickly, although I must say I practice good SO2 management, and I think that that makes a significant difference. It's sad to me how many people have what I consider to be a closed mind about using sulfites, and
Well,
I think it
yeah.
makes quite a bit of difference at the end of the day.
Well, I'm
Really.
going to say most of the stuff I've got sitting around that's been open and partially drunk is somebody else's stuff. So
Right.
it's anybody's guess what they did at the end, whether they use proper
Yeah.
dose. So yeah, some of them do, some of them don't, and you don't know until you go back to try it and find out. Oh, okay. They mostly because I'll usually they'll stay in a fridge. I've got a little beer fridge, and that's where all the open ones just stay in there. So they're not just
Mm-hmm.
sitting around in my kitchen, going up and down in temperature.
Yeah.
But
Well, so are we? Do we want to get going, or does somebody else have some more chatter first?
no, we're starting to collect some questions, so let's get going, and we'll see what comes out.
So maybe let's consider this first. Are any of the questions related more or less to tonight's topic, or are they standalone questions? If you have any standalone questions, let's get those out of the way first, and then that way, by doing that, we've cleaned the person's plate, so they'll be more open to learn and listen to new information.
The questions we've got so far are mostly related to, well, in mead making in general and recipes, so some of it is technique oriented.
Mm-hmm.
But
all right, so fire away on one of the technique ones.
Okay. Let's find one here that's not gonna.
I'm glad we have questions. Usually the crowd's too quiet in my estimation.
I know. Well, we've got
That's true.
Quite a few.
You want
people
Peter's
on
fruit
here.
question?
Yeah, let's pull Peter's first one.
Okay. Peter wants to know how you approach adding fruit to a mead. How best to extract and preserve the flavor. Do you freeze it? Do you boil it? Pectic enzyme, sour it? Yeah, I know, fruit's pretty wide. How about dark berries, blueberry, aronia, chokecherry, chokeberry, black cherry, elderberry, marionberry, blackberry, raspberry?
No. So, Peter, that's a great question. I actually have almost a canned answer for everybody, and that is this, that when you ferment a fruit in the primary, and so it's actually going through the fermentation process, it changes the characteristic or the personality, if you will, of the fruit significantly. And of course, we all go back because, yeah. So wine doesn't taste like grape juice, and that's generally the first thing that people say. And so when we put fruit in our meads and we ferment them, it changes it quite a lot. Whereas if we wait until the fermentation has been stabilized so that you can now add more fruit juice, which obviously contains sugar. And so if we haven't stabilized that mead, all we've done is added more sugar. And incidentally, the juice has a lot of water in it. And so even if your yeast has tapped out because they reached their alcohol, no, their ABV limit. In other words, they've tapped
Tolerance.
out because they can't. Yeah, their tolerance. That's right. Thank you. I must have ate a dumb pill here for dinner. By adding the water and the sugar, the fruit juice, you've actually diluted both the ABV and you've added some sugars now, and so your fermentation will start back up, even if it's 6 months, 8 months, a year old. A lot of times, it'll start right back up. But if you stabilized it correctly, now you can add the fruit. And what happens there is that the alcohol is actually leaching out the fruit flavor out of the fruit. And so because it's not going through a fermentation process, it's going to taste very much like fresh fruit, very jammy, and it's as if you were eating it as table food. So with all of that in mind, my answer to people like you generally, if you're hopefully the ones that want to learn to become better mead makers, is to do this. I suggest making, and I don't know what's your level of, here's my suggestion: make 3 different batches, or even 4 if you really wanted to be technical about it, with the same must. Make one as a traditional, make the other one where you put all the fruit up front, make the second one where you split the fruit half and half, so half of your fruit in primary, the other half in secondary. your next one, put all the fruit on the back side. And by doing this, you're going to personally know deep inside your heart what the difference is between primary fermentation, all of it going in the back side, and part of it going in, half of it going in up front, half of it going in on the back side. And then if you made the first batch where it was just a traditional, that's your control base that you can measure all these other batches to. And believe it or not, if you were to take part of the batch where you fermented all your fruit up front, and you blended that with part of the same parts, so part one and part two, both the same parts, one with the fruit all up front and the other one with the fruit all on the back side, that's going to taste even different than when you fermented part of it up front and you extracted the fruit on the back side. So I think we've done a good job, hopefully, of telling you what you could anticipate or what to think of in your mind, how they differ. But what I would really strongly advise to you and anyone else who hasn't done this comparison game yet is to make that one of your next adventures, is to actually do some testing like this so that you know without a doubt in your own mind the differences. And you'll then be able to incorporate this knowledge into building your mead the way that you want to with intellectual design on a piece of paper before you even go to the store to buy your stuff. You guys have any in addition to that you want to speak to?
Well, I was actually going to ask you how you approach figuring out how much fruit to use if you happen to have, come into a windfall of, a particular fruit. How do you figure out? I personally usually start by doing a search on Got Mead to see what people do, and then I also check Jack Keller's website for making fruit wines. And I usually go with slightly lower than he suggests because I want to be able to taste the honey as well. That's how I approach it. How do you suggest approaching it, or do you do everything with testing?
Well, so that's a great question. I still almost always, let me wind that in just a little bit. I still all the time make meads with tests behind them. Like I'm still constantly in that learning stage, constantly in that testing mentality so that I can continue to learn. But I've done so much of that for the period of time that I have been making mead, a lot of those things are kind of settled in my mind. But I want to strongly encourage everybody, when you make a mead, make it with some intention. Make it so that this is a school test, so to speak. You're doing an experiment. And as you start to add up more and more experiences, i.e. more and more experiments, you're going to have a better deck of cards to deal with as you get, further down the road, and you'll have a better idea of how to put together your mead from the very start on a piece of paper. AJ, to answer your question exactly, I think some of the things that I consider is, so without a doubt, we can make a mead that I like to call, and a lot of people do, call it a fruit bomb, and it's extremely very fruity, right? And so it's fruit forward, it's fruit heavy. Some fruits are very powerful and strong and overwhelming, whereas other fruits are extremely soft and delicate and takes a million pounds just to get a quarter ounce of flavor in there. And so the first thing I think I'll do is I'll consider, do I want this to be a fruit bomb, or do I want this to be more of a delicate thing where the fruit isn't the primary, the leading actor in the play, so to speak. And then I'll have to consider, is this a powerful fruit where it doesn't take a whole lot to make a splash, or is this something soft and delicate like a pear or a strawberry where you almost can't get enough regardless of how hard you try? So that'll determine two things, I guess, maybe how much fruit do I need, and then where do I want to place that? Do I want to put it up front? Do I want to split it, or do I want to put it all in the back? Now, one of the things that I've started to do about a year ago by design is I wanted to start to learn to be a blender. As you guys know, very rarely is a great wine made just from 1 year's appellation, and they age it and then they bottle it up and it's all good. The really good winemakers are excellent at taking and blending different vintages, and many times a wine is not a sole grape varietal, and so they take combinations of several different grapes from different places and at different times, different vintages, and they blend them all together. And so I have now tried to, that was my goal last year, is to start to learn to become a good blender. So your question's not as easy as it is. It's not an easy one to answer, because here's part of the deal. Many times I'll start out where I'll make what I consider a table wine. It used to frustrate me to no end that people would just love my meats, but the people that were dyed-in-the-wool wine drinkers, when it came time to eat dinner, they would go to their wine. And so I started thinking, I want to be able to make something that's a mead that will still satisfy a bona fide wine drinker. And so I started making what I call a table wine style mead, where it's generally very, very dry, not maybe exceedingly dry, but dry to off dry. Generally, it's not overpowering in fruit, so it's certainly not a fruit bomb. And so I started to do that, and oftentimes I'll make a big batch, and I end up breaking it off into different segments. And so I might make let's say, for instance, I make a Merlot Piment. I'll make a big batch. Maybe I'll buy 2 wine kits and then water that down appropriately and add my honey. I'll make part of that batch to be the Merlot table wine, so to speak, where it's dry and not overbearing with the fruit. And then I'll separate that and have another batch that's a very much a Merlot fruit bomb, so to speak. And of course, with the higher presence of fruit, we can, if we want to, add more alcohol, because that'll allow the balance to take place between the additional fruit flavors and the higher alcohol content. And then maybe even lastly, drive it all the way up to where the third portion of all of that is a port style wine. And so those are all things that you have to consider. And then you also have to consider within that, do I want, how much of the honey aspect do I want to show up in the finished profile? Do I want a legitimate fraction of honey where you can really smell and taste it? Or, sometimes people say, I can't taste the honey. Well, if people say that, I think then they don't know what the base flavor of the honey is, which is sometimes just kind of earthy, unless it's, different honeys have different personalities for sure. But you should always be able to get that earthiness from the honey in anything that has honey in it, I think.
I suppose the experiment to try, if you want to make sure you can taste the honey, is to make a wine at the same ABV, using honey for one and sugar for the other.
Yeah, and I think as soon as you make your first thing, anything with sugar in it, hopefully, so I was almost going to let my personal bias shine through there. I was going to say, hopefully you'll never make anything with sugar again. I actually don't understand, and I make wine, but I make 85% of what I make is mead. I kind of don't really understand why people would ever want to use sugar in a wine.
Well, if you're not making a grape wine, you need to add sugar in order to get the ABV up enough to be a proper wine, unless you're making a
sure. But so my
wine.
point is, why wouldn't you add honey to get those same gravity points and also add the complexity and all the nice nuances that honey adds?
I got two good reasons for that myself.
Yeah, because you want
to. Sugar's really cheap, and sometimes the fruit's fine standing on its own, and a lot of times I can't
Right.
tell if I use honey. If I can't
Okay.
tell I use the honey, why am I bothering with all the
Then why
expense?
spend? Yeah, I get it. My feeling is if you've ever, maybe you guys want to do this. That anytime you go, I've never thought of that, or I don't know what that tastes like. Well, then make it so
Try
you
it.
do know what it tastes like. Go buy some sugar and just ferment some sugar.
Yeah, I actually
then
did
ask
that as an experiment to try
And
to
what?
educate my palate.
Yeah.
I just
Right.
essentially made a blank wine using sugar, and then I added too much acid to one and too much tannin to another and some vanilla to another and too much oak to another, just
Perfect.
so that I could
Yeah.
try to educate my palate.
See, and
Interestingly,
that-
you get a lot of vanilla from standard sugar, from plain sugar, but maybe
Well,
not
I
real
actually-
corn syrup. But what we get from our cane sugars comes out as a lot of vanilla in there.
Yeah, I actually found that
Mhm.
I got better vanilla from the oak than I did from the vanilla.
that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I personally think that the taste of just fermented sugar all by itself, table sugar. I realize there's all kinds of different sources of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find it really very appealing, and so I kind of go, I don't think I want to put that in my finished profile.
I don't find it has much of a taste, but then again, I started out as a winemaker, and you just put sugar in because that's what you do.
Because that's what you do, yeah.
Because
Right.
otherwise you end up with something that won't keep long enough, or it's too thin or too flaccid or whatever.
So there you go, guys. There's another test parameters that you can play with. Make some stuff with different sugar sources. A lot of people like to make Acer Glens. I don't particularly think that. Well, I'll be honest. I've never made an Acer Glen where it was all completely maple syrup. And that's because I don't think that fermented maple syrup on its own is really that great. It's not overly appealing to me, and so I see it as something that you want to add on the backside after you've stabilized to get the maple presence in there to whatever degree you want to. Whereas if you put it all in up front, to me it feels to me like that's a very expensive gravity points that don't really add the cost benefit to the overall profile.
And that's actually a fair assessment. What I find for me works is I use a 540 ml can of maple syrup and a kilogram of honey, and that tends to leave me with the way I abuse my meads anyways, it tends to leave me with enough sugar at the end that you can still tell that it was maple and you can taste the honey.
Yeah.
But I've done a bit of experimenting back and forth on that, and I actually find for that when abusing my yeast so that it doesn't finish actually works better than back sweetening.
Yeah. Well, and there's certainly that. If somebody wants to try to leave some residual sugar, then I would say, just as you've said, stretch out your feeding over a longer period of time. In other words, kind of let them struggle. I oxygen thing with the O2 tank and a stone, but if I intentionally want to try to leave residual sugar behind, then I wouldn't do that because I don't want to buff out my yeast and make them into Superman. And so I try to do all the things that we would typically try to promote as modern mead makers. I kind of parse some of those to the side so that my yeast aren't overly strong and doing well, so that maybe we can end up with some residual sugar at the end of the day.
Yeah, like the one time I tried my standard, Chevette Girls standard Acer Glen, I tried it using, all the good mead techniques that I'd learned since I developed that recipe the first time, and I actually was not happy with the results. So when I make that, I just go back to my bad habits, because it actually works better when it's not gone as dry as it can go if you treat your yeast nicely. So I just, in that particular case, I'm an advocate for yeast abuse.
Well, so that's a great segue. We won't hang here for very long, but I'm a staunch believer in picking whatever ABV you want your mead to end up at, and then run it dry and stabilize and then back sweeten. You might also, if you know that you're going to be, let's say you're going to be adding some fruit juice, and it's not a high concentration of gravity points, then make it a higher ABV so that by the time you put in whatever else you're going to be putting in at the end of the day, it ends up close to the ABV that you want, rather than making your batch at the ABV you want, stabilize and then dilute it down, and now you're not happy because you're out of balance with your alcohol fraction in your profile.
Yeah, I did a lot of my early mead making based on, okay, let's see what happens. And, in doing that, figured out a lot of things that worked and some things that didn't, and some things I liked and some things I didn't. But I think now my mead making is matured enough that I have started actually considering the ABV before I get started, and, either targeting it so that the yeast poops out when I want it to, or that I go dry, stabilize, and back sweeten.
Right. And that's important because the alcohol is a huge part of all the different fractions that we need to consider when we're trying to put together. I like to think of a mead. I've never really thought of it in this way, but it'll work for an example tonight as a piece of pie or a pizza where you cut it up and you have many different segments. Really, the difference between a good mead, and I hope by now we've got so much good information out there on the internet, on Got Mead, on all of our podcasts. We've got great Facebook groups. Honestly, there's really no reason for people to be making mead with a whole bunch of flaws anymore. I mean,
there's also a lot of really bad information out there too. Let's face it.
Yes, that's true. But so for our listeners out there in listener land, if you guys are still struggling making meads that have lots of problems, you haven't done your homework well enough to go find some good information. And I certainly don't want to promote myself. That's not what this is about. But I think we did a really great job a year ago about this time when we went through the series of making mead with modern protocols. There's really no reason anymore to still be making stuff with a boatload of flaws. And that's not to say you might have a little flaw here, a little flaw there, but we shouldn't be at a point any longer where we're making stuff that takes forever to age. And the sad thing about that is people think you can make crap and age it over a period of time and it's going to turn into good.
Not always. Sometimes, not always.
Occasionally, but mostly no, yeah.
No.
Right. Crap can get better, but you're not going to ever take crap and make it great. Because for those of us that once you develop a good palate, you're going to be always able to taste some of those off flavors. Even if they're gone, you're going to still be able to taste what I call a footprint from those being in there at one point in time.
I think the argument here is that we have crap mead now, which is not crap mead. It's actually good mead. It's just really strong in some flavors that will age into a good balance. And then there's crap mead that's got off flavors or serious mistakes in it, which will never age out. So the idea that crap mead will get better, it never will. But a good mead that's exceedingly strong in certain flavors will always mellow into a better mead later.
That's right.
If you're not an idiot and let your airlocks go dry like I keep doing.
Well,
so this is how I end up with flaws is being an idiot. It's total, problems exists between keyboard and monitor.
So let's back up for just quick 2 more minutes on the fruit thing, and then we can move on to the next question, or we can go get started in tonight's topic. Sorry, I was chewing on a bite that I just stuffed in my mouth that I shouldn't have. I oftentimes, if I'm going to ferment my fruit, which honestly, for me personally, I think even if I want a real strong fruit bomb, which would maybe unknowingly make you think I want to put all my fruit in the backside, even when I'm making a fruit bomb, I still like to put a lot of my fruit up front because to me that gives you a nice balance it gives you a base then to bring over your jammy fruit to sit on top of. And I think that for me, that just works better than doing straight fruit in the backside.
I'm a
Yeah,
big
don't put
fan
all your
of
fruit in one basket, as they say.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of putting fruit in the primary, and then if I want it or it's warranted, more fruit in secondary. You know, so
Right.
that lets me adjust. Because if I put it all in secondary, and you're like, well, crap, that didn't work. Then what? You've got no recourse at that point,
Right.
short of blending. But
Mm-hmm. And so even when I want to ferment fruit up front, I never put my fruit in at when I build my must. In other words, now keep in mind too here, and this is just a side note, and we'll probably have to talk about that for a minute too. I live in a fruit desert. Colorado is extremely dry. We have a little bit of fruit. Most of it's about 150 miles away. Other than that, we have to rely on frozen fruit for the most part. So even if I have fresh fruit, almost always I'll freeze it, because when we freeze it, it seems to break the cellular structure in the fruit, and so in essence, it's kind of crushing it. It's breaking the cell walls through the expansion of the ice crystals, so to speak. Excuse me, and that gives then the yeast a much better access to getting at the sugars in the fruit and all the flavonoids and whatnot. But even with that said, I don't throw my fruit in until after I've pitched my yeast and my must, and I'm at a good place where I'm maybe 2 or 3 days into where I've moved out of lag phase. Most of my lag phases never last more than 6 or 8 hours at the very most. If they're longer than an 8-hour period, I start wondering if I start thinking maybe something's wrong. But once I move out of lag, and then I let growth pace go for 2 or 3 days maybe, so I'm like my yeast are really rocking and rolling. That's then when I want to introduce my fruit. I would think if you picked fresh fruit and it's clean enough that you would eat it out of a bowl, off on your table, then in my opinion, and I might be wrong here, but in my opinion, I think that's also then clean enough that if you waited until you had your must in a full-on boil, so to speak, you've got massive amounts of foam and all of that. I think that if you can eat it out with your hand out of a bowl, it's clean enough to go into your must at that point in time. I would also, though, again, I would freeze it first. And I wouldn't throw, because now we have a living biomass, I wouldn't throw frozen fruit in there at all, because you're going to shock the hell out of your yeast because of the temperature drop.
plus, you've got the water that's frozen into the fruit.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I oftentimes do, and maybe I'll use this as an example, I wanted to build a couple, 2 or 3 meads maybe tonight and go through the process of making a recipe. I've made a really, really simple mead to make, or at least in my mind, it's very simple, and I've won quite a bit of awards with it. And one of the things I'll do is I buy triple berry from Costco, and you have to use a boatload of it. It's amazing how much, if you want to make a fruit bomb. But what I'll do is I'll make my must. I'll let it get going good. I'll pull out all of my 100 pounds of fruit or however much I'm going to use, and I make bigger batches, so don't let that 100-pound thing alarm you. But I'll actually let my bags thaw out, and then I'll cut a corner off, and then I'll pour all the juice. When it's semi-frozen, I'll crush it with my hand a little bit to try to break up the fruit a little bit more. And then once it thaws out entirely, I'll pour all of the juice out of the bags into my must to ferment that. And usually I might keep half of my flesh, the fruit flesh, put it in primary. And then the other half of the bags that I've poured the fruit out, I've poured the juice out, I'll put the fruit, the flesh, back in the freezer, and I'll freeze that and save it until I've stabilized that batch of mead, and then I'll come back and add all the flesh in there. I know that I have a friend, Pierre Rodrigue, up in Canada. You guys in Canada and in Michigan and all you guys really got wild fruit growing everywhere. I'm just so envious of all that.
Well, yeah.
I would think if you've got a steamer and you can get all fresh juice so we're still talking about mellow mills. If you could make mellow mills with no water, period, all day long, that's the best route you can go.
That's totally going to depend on the kind of fruit you got, because doing that with apples is feasible. Doing that with red currants, not so much.
Not so much, yeah. But cherries.
Well, yeah,
I get cherry juice all day long in Michigan.
Currants and elderberries might, and maybe I'm a fruit idiot because I don't live in where you guys do. I think currants and elderberries might be by and large the only ones that would, and raspberries maybe.
No, well, you don't often see raspberry juice, but you can make it if you're patient and have lots of raspberries.
Yeah,
right.
There's a fruit winery that I visited, and what they do is they juice the fruit and then add sugar to bring up the ABV to, I think, 12%. And that's how they make theirs. Whereas I always made, I got 3 pounds of this, and I put it in water with sugar, and away we go. But some of their stuff was better than mine, and some of their stuff actually I couldn't taste the difference. So, my 3 pounds of strawberries versus their strawberry juice worked just as well.
And like we said at the beginning of this question, and this has been a pretty long answer.
Yeah, it has.
Well, these are all the things that we have to take into consideration when we're trying to sit down intelligently putting together a mead on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Well, and
and I can tell you this.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Well, I was just going to say.
No, you go.
The next logical progression from this jammy question that we've had is, how do you figure out how much fruit? Because that's a question I see a lot. I go by taste myself. I just keep getting it in there until I get the flavor that I'm looking for, and that varies depending on the fruit.
And it's all how you do your recipe is also going to vary if you've only got a limited amount of the fruit too. Like I tend to figure out how much can I make from this volume of fruit that I have picked, because I can't get any more after this. And how much do I freeze and reserve for adding in secondary? Which I don't do that because I don't do fruit in secondary yet. It's one of those things that when I get some empty carboys, I'm going to try doing some more experiments with. But because I have a whole freezer full
and that's
of
a great point. You guys, you always want to have, if you're making a wine kit, however you've made your own juice, please don't throw everything that you've got into your bucket when you start out, because if you end up wanting more fruit, you don't have any more. If you bought a wine kit and now, well, gosh, I wish I would have had a little bit more of that grape variety in my profile. If you don't have any more sitting to the side, you're screwed. And so always when you're having fruit additions, always make sure that you've left some behind so that you've got opportunity to adjust your mead, on the backside, so to speak. From time to time, I see lots of people, quite a few actually, and please, you guys, I'm not picking on anybody, but I need to make examples. And the intent is always to make us all better, right? Rarely, almost never. In fact, I'll just say never, because if I'm wrong, it's only by a 0.0001. A mead is never done when all you've done is fermented it and now you think it's finished. Honestly, now you're just getting started. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between a good mead and a really great mead. And the word that I use in my household is we're looking for the magic. This is magical. It's an intangible, non-metrified. You can't measure it. You maybe or probably don't even know what happened to make it magical. but the magic part never shows up on its own accord by accident when you've made your mead. Even if you've made your mead intelligently, like we hope to learn how to do tonight, you still are not finished. And I'm amazed at how people, I started this a month ago and I've got it in bottles already. It's like, wow, that's a shame. That's really too bad. Even if I let my stuff age in carboys for a year and bottle it and then open it up and drink it a year later, almost everything I make, I still, when I open it up, I go, well, I could make that better now. And I think that's because I'm continuing to grow. And I hope that you guys, when that starts happening to you, don't use that to get down on yourself. Use that to realize that you're getting better all the time. But then also use that to realize the longer that I wait before I actually freeze this in time, so to speak, by putting it in a bottle, the more opportunity I have for it to do all of the magic that it does as it ages. Even if you've made a perfect fusel-free mead right out of the box, and you should be able to do that now or very close to that, it's still going to get better over time. But I've just never made a mead that it was absolutely spot on without doing some adjusting. And of course, when you're talking about a trad, about the only thing that you do have to adjust is adding more honey. So I always start out making them dry. And a lot of times I'll save half my batch, or at least a portion of my batch that's dry or just barely off dry. And I find that even if you want to make a dry mead, if you put just a couple points of your honey back in afterwards, it really makes that honey pop. Even though it's still real dry, it just makes it taste a lot better than drinking something that's bone dry. But so even with the traditional, you still have some room to make adjustments, and that is by adding either a oak or a layering of different oaks. You have acid adjustments that can be done, and then of course your sweetness level that you add more or less honey. So you've got those three different arenas to play with just for your traditional. Now, if you made a mead that goes in the other categories, you've got a boatload of different adjuncts that you can still play with. And so the whole idea here is to take our meads from being good and hopefully eventually start to get good enough that we can make at least a good part of those fairly magical. And trust me, the difference between a good mead and a magical mead sometimes is the smallest, finest little line that you could ever imagine. And it's and those are the that little tiny little line that's less than a cigarette paper thin. Sometimes those are the biggest line of all, right? To move it that little bit into that magical realm.
And that's
I think the
like
trick
the
is
closer
finding
you-
the line.
well, yeah, and that's
Yeah,
why it's
the closer
good.
you get to good, the hard. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and that's why it's good to have your meads checked out by people who aren't your friends or your mom. I see people all the time. They're like, "Well, all my buddies said it was amazing," and it's like, "Yeah, I'm sure they did. All my buddies say my mead's amazing too, even when it's not." I've given
Yeah,
them
my
mead
buddies will
that.
Well,
drink that terrible Joe's Ancient Orange that I like way overaged and didn't take the fruit out of, and like they'll drink that shit by the gallon.
And tell you
I
what,
don't
they
trust
love it.
I don't
Yeah.
trust their palate.
You can't trust their palates, yeah, because they're your friends, so they're already prejudiced, and I mean, it's like Pete is one of my good friends. Ryan, you're one of my good friends. But I know if I gave you a mead and said I want your honest opinion, I would get it no matter how painful it might be. I would get it, and that's the
right.
thing is you got to give it to people who are willing to set aside whatever friendship they might have with you, if they do, and give you an honest opinion, and that's hard, because you're not going to get better if you don't know if it's better,
That's why I
That's
brought some
right.
bad examples to Mazer Cup.
Yeah, let people tell you
Well,
what
and
went wrong,
when you said that too initially, Vicky, the first thing I said is then you've got the wrong kind of friends.
Well,
And that could be two ways.
These are
Either
not my mead people friends. They're people who like to drink mead. They're not people who
Yeah.
like to drink and make mead. There's a difference. They're a different
Yeah.
set of friends. They
Yeah,
like to
very
drink what I
different.
make, and they're
Sure.
happy to get it. And they're like, yeah, sure, Vicky, we'll drink everything you give us. Whether we don't care. It's good. It's got alcohol in it. We'll drink it.
Right.
But when I
Yeah.
give it to my
So-
other set of friends, my mead making friends, they're like, wow, Vicky, I love the attempt, but I'm getting some oxidation here, and that's okay. I mean, while I may turn a little red in the face because it's embarrassing, because often I already know this, but I wanted it
I
confirmed.
love your attempt.
Yeah, I will
Uh,
get an honest response from the people who are in that
Yeah.
particular part of my, friendship crowds. So, and that's what you,
At
I mean,
Well,
very
that's,
worst,
that's what far too
at
few
very
people are
worst, you're
willing
going
to
to pay
do.
people to give you an honest. Yeah, at the very worst, you're going to pay people to give you an honest opinion by entering it in a contest.
Yeah,
well, and keep in mind too. Then make sure that the friends that you want a good idea. Number one, you're close enough friends that they can be honest. But also too, remember we talked about those that just drink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You give them a glass and it's gone in 2 minutes, and then there's those that still have 3/4 of an ounce 35 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
Give your, if you want an opinion, ask the ones that are the tasters instead of the drinkers, if that makes sense.
Right.
Hey, Mish,
Okay.
are you still there? We haven't let you have
No,
very much room, have we, bud?
he had to drop off. Work call came in, so that's
Oh, I see.
yeah.
Okay.
It's the middle of the day for him. So, but
Right.
yeah, I mean that's one of the big things is your mead. You can improve your mead on your own without necessarily giving it to comps and things like that if you've got enough experience to be able to detect the big faults. But when you start approaching that point of diminishing returns where a small movement can take it from a good mead to a great mead, that's when it's time to hand it off to somebody who has they have no not
Dog in the
interest.
hunt.
Yeah, but they've got no investment in your mead. They don't care. They're just going to
Hmm.
tell you what they think, whether that's via competition and a blind tasting, or if they're like Pete, who's not afraid to give you the raw truth. You know, and he's probably one of my closest friends, and I don't doubt for one damn second that he would tell me everything was wrong with one of my meads if I gave it to him. He would let me know because he'd want me to improve. He's doing it out of friendship to say, here's how you can improve this, because he's got more
He's hurting you
experience
out
than
of
I do.
love.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's got more
Well,
experience
how
than I
lucky to
do.
have a friend like
Right,
Absolutely.
yeah.
how
It's
lucky to have a friend like that.
exactly, yeah. It's a hard thing to take, but it's also a good thing to have. So it's you have
Right.
to swallow your pride and be willing to say, I don't know everything. There are people that know more than I do, or that can give me a unbiased third opinion that may enlighten me to things that I can't perceive because I'm inside the thing. It's
That's
a
right.
yeah, it's a
That's right.
question of getting outside of your personal bubble. I know what I like, and some of my meads that I like are not meads that I would ever enter a competition because I wouldn't want to read the results, but I like them anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, as you know, sometimes you sit down and you're chewing on a mead with a couple other people, and there's just a piece in there, and you're going, and you're wringing your hands, and you can't quite put your finger on it, and somebody else says, "Oh, I'm getting it." Boom, you go, "That's it exactly," and you just, it was there, but you just can't quite pull it out, or they'll say, "I'm getting this," and then that'll trigger you to go, "Oh, and this is bubble gum or cotton candy," or whatever it is that you were trying to find. Sometimes having more mouths with calling out different flavors will help you kind of wiggle that guy into the corner and suss him out.
Yeah.
Here's another thought that just came to me when we're getting close to having our meads kind of finish up. When we first all started making mead, we all learned that making mead will teach you how impatient you really are, or it will teach you patience, one of the two, or generally, hopefully both, right?
It'll reveal to you how much
Yeah.
patience you have. That's for sure.
That's right, guys. This might sound it's nothing special. It's not really that big of a piece of advice. This is huge. So please hear me. When you're in those final things where you're, each little piece is really starting to happen, make the bigger difference. please, if you don't know what to do for sure, then don't do anything.
Yeah.
Let
Fiddling
that
can make
sink
it
in.
worse. Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
if you don't know for sure, that's the best time in the world to grab a hold of some patience and say, okay, I'll come back and consider this. Maybe all it takes is another day or two. Maybe you're kind of palate fatigued or whatever, but don't make that move, especially when you get closer to the final result. Go slow. Make sure that your moves really count. Don't get impatient and go, okay. And I'm amazed when some people go like, toss this and how come? Well, I don't really know. Wrong.
Yeah.
That's where you turn everything south and it goes sideways on you, and you don't stand the chance of capturing the magic.
If I've got one
So
where I know something's off, but I can't figure out what it is, that's the one that I'll take that bottle and I'll send it to you or to Pete or Tom or somebody and say, okay, I know this isn't where I need it to be. What am I missing here? Help me out and get a second opinion. Basically, it's just like anything else. Sometimes
that's right.
Yeah, I used to preach this when I'm coaching people, in marketing and that. I preach to them, you don't know your forest because you're already in the trees. You need somebody who's outside your forest and can tell you how the woods are configured, so that you can get a better sense of the lay of the land. And that's, it's the same way it works for everything. I mean, if you're making your own mead, of course you're biased. You can't not be.
Absolutely.
Full stop.
You know
You
what
just
I
can't.
started to do to try to teach, you know what I started to do to try to show my own bias to myself? I would score my meads before I'd send them into a competition and then see how my scores of my own mead sussed out at the end of the day based on the scores that I got back from other judges.
That's a good idea.
I can tell you this, we all like our meads a little bit better than we should maybe. But again, and so here's the but to that, and it's a legitimate but. You're making what you like for your palate, right? And so that there is some room for you to think a little bit more highly of it because you're making what fits your personality and fits what you're looking for, whereas somebody else, it might not. And hopefully, we'll move to a point at someday when judges are mature enough as judges that they can judge something that they don't necessarily like and still give it the appropriate score in spite of the not necessarily liking that particular category or style or and so anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
So why don't we do this?
Tangent there.
Well, I think it was good information. I hope people learn from that.
Yeah. Well, it generated a fair amount of chat conversation. So, I think it got some people thinking a little bit. But, I mean, I've seen people I'm one of those people that I never think my meat is good enough. It's one of the reasons I don't enter competitions because I'm sure that I'm just going to get nailed and I'm going to feel horrible. So I just don't enter it. But, and if I was to, like you were saying, to score my own mead, I'd give it a much lower score because I'm so self-critical about my stuff. And I'm aware that I am, and that's why I give it to other people because I can't be, I can't look at it in a way that is going to be any kind of honest. I just can't, so.
Okay, and so you know what? That's equally as good of information. If you if you score your meads, and they come back from a competition and your scores were higher than on average than what other people thought, or if they came back and your scores were lower than what your scores were lower than what you got, that's telling too. That's telling you, hey, you're better than what you're giving yourself credit for.
Yeah.
So either way you win.
Yeah, true.
Right?
I still think I'd be overly self-critical because that's just my nature. It's something I'm aware of but have
Vicky,
very little control over. So.
That's all of us. I talk to all of the guys. We're all friends that compete in these stupid competitions, and it's like playing a friendly game of cards with each other. But I think probably every one of us that I talk to, we're all in that same boat. We all probably don't give ourselves the amount of credit that we should, even though we're, whatever number we are in the
Well,
Mead Maker of the Year. So
which is
that's
coming out
unfortunately
soon.
just,
Which is coming out
yeah,
soon.
well,
As
as
soon
soon
as
as
we hear
Texas
from the
will,
Texas, yeah. But
right,
yeah,
right.
I mean, there's people who are overly critical, and there are people who think their mead shit doesn't stink. That they make the greatest mead
That's,
there ever was.
that's right.
And I've had some of that mead, and it's like, okay, you're wrong. All right, just to be short and sweet, but you're wrong. This is not the greatest mead ever made. There are some things you're not doing properly. If you'd like to learn, I'm happy to help you. And if I don't know how to do something, I can refer you to the people that do know how to. But that's up to you. You have to decide. you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
But we do have some other. We haven't gotten a lot into pulling recipes together specifically, but I think we're chipping away at all the around the edges of it. Um,
Yeah, I suspect all this is going to help, and if we ever get to then I'm not. If we don't ever get there, that's fine with me too. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we can always pick up and carry on with further and do a part two if it comes to that. All
Sure.
right, Michael, the Bee Whisperer on Twitter, and also picked up on the chat, was asking, what do you think about using things like pie fillings, candies, food items? And do you think the meads like this are okay, or do you feel you need to like juice and use fresh herbs? So, what are your thoughts around those kinds of things?
My thoughts on that is that anything you want to make a good mead is in play. It's valid. It's worth it. Go for it. Don't let anything make boundaries that shouldn't be there. Anything.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. Is like if it works and comes out good, you know, I see people ridiculing the people who make the candy meads, the ones that are made from like Skittles and Mountain Dew is
Red
another one.
hots or
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there was another one. I can't think of them. They're little lozenge candies. But anyway, they're making them from candy, and
Jolly
Jolly
Ranchers.
Ranchers. Yes, thank you. I drew a complete
Mm.
blank. But yeah, like Jolly Ranchers or Mountain Dew. I've seen Mountain Dew mead, and these are meads that do not appeal to me personally. But I think if somebody can
Well,
make
and,
a
and I
mead
would,
out of those that tastes good, then hey, go for it. You're not poisoning anybody.
and that's what I was going to say. Just because you have the red light, I'll also say I don't think you're going to be able to make a good mead out of
Well,
a lot of
maybe
that
not.
stuff.
Yeah,
But
but like you say, there are no
but
real
try,
limits.
try.
You don't know till you try.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean,
That's right.
nobody
Find
would
out
have
for
thought.
yourself if this makes a good mead.
Right. I mean, nobody would have thought that you could use graham crackers in a mead, and yet there are commercial meads that actually use graham crackers in them, and to get a pie crust note going on. And I was just like, no way. And then I tasted it; it was really good. So it works.
Hmm.
It can be done. You know.
Yeah.
So
You're never gonna find out if it's gonna work unless you try it.
unless you try it, yeah, and
And
it may
you
mean
know,
you have to
and if you
dump a
try it,
mead, but
and if you try it and it's a disaster, well, just be happy you did it in a small amount and you learned something. Don't do that again,
Hopefully you did
or
it in a
find a
small
different way to
amount.
do that.
Yeah, hopefully you didn't do the 5-gallon batch with that experimental thing. I always do those in 1-gallon batches.
Or better yet, if you're
See,
trying to do something really silly, you divide a 1-gallon batch into small bits like wine bottles or something.
Mm-hmm. And try
I'm
adding.
not afraid to make a big mistake because I feel like I'm not afraid. I think, and this is another point I think that's good for people to realize. You learn a lot when you miss the mark, and now I go, okay, this didn't turn out where I wanted it to be, but now I get the great opportunity of taking this and turning it into something else.
How do I fix it?
Well, and sometimes
The,
you
the
Yeah,
can.
motivation
and then
to actually do that is the hard bit, though.
Yeah. Well, that's the
yeah,
thing about
but
everything I've ever tried.
That's
Learning
just
to
like-
do it right. Learning to do it right is not the part that teaches you anything. Learning to fix it once you fucked it up, that's the important part.
our failure should always teach us more than our successes. I believe in all things in life, really.
I listened to a video earlier today where it was an Australian commentating on his view of America. And one of the things he said really struck me. He said, "You Americans aren't afraid to fail. You learn so much through your failures, and you keep going forward anyway." And I was like, "Yeah, we kind of do, don't we?" But it really made me
Mm-hmm.
think, because a class that I was in several years ago, the motto of the class was "Fail forward." Don't be afraid to
That's kind of
screw
how I
up.
run
Right.
my Aikido
Yeah,
classes too.
yeah.
We're in
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
We're here to make mistakes, make big glorious mistakes, and then learn from them.
That's right. That's right. So, and that's so that was a perfect segue for this. Is another one of those things that doesn't sound like much, but really, please listen, because it is. Anytime you're making a mead, don't force it to comply with what your thoughts are that it should be. Let it be what it wants to be.
Yeah.
In other words, let's say you had some great grandiose idea that I wanted to make this, and as you got closer to it, it's not going to where this is. I think if you're not so regimented and going, damn it, I got this, I'm going to bend this, and I'm going to put it in a forge, and I'm going to heat it up, and I'm going to bend it into what I want it to be. No, just let your meats be what they want to be. If they're not going where you want them to go, let them go where they want to go.
That sounds like Aikido.
Honestly, that's a huge point. If you'll learn to do that, you're going to learn to be less controlling over everything.
Yeah.
If it's not going where you want it to go, just start over again somewhere else. Let this one evolve into what it wants to be, and it'll probably end up being way better than if you forced it into something it didn't want to be.
And that's one of the things I see when people are going, "Well, I want blah blah recipe." It's like, look at what you've got. Look at what's around you. Look at what's available. Think about what you like. And then also consider foods you find and flavors in foods that you find that really just that really just do it for you. What are the things that are your favorites? Start with that.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's like, I've got a gazillion recipes. You go look at Got Mead, and in the forum there's about 80 gazillion recipes in there. And I'll look at them and go, lovely, fine, whatever. You're not gonna see me going after this or that. I look at, gosh, I've got, I don't know, 5 boxes of dried cherries and 2 things of cherry juice. What can I do with that? What would appeal to me? What would keep me interested? And what are the possibilities here? What are other flavors that might do well in there that I find tasty? And I'll sit and think about it.
I've got to agree. I've copied a recipe literally verbatim 3 times, I think. Every other time I've used them for inspiration, but yeah, I've only ever made a recipe off Got Mead as it says 3 times, and one of them was a JAO on my 5th bottle. I did it as per recipe. But anyway, let's leave that alone and move on.
Yeah, I'm totally like that too. It's like you use the best recipe for inspiration, and then you use what you've got on hand.
Yeah.
Or what you can do. Like, yeah, I can't follow a recipe that says use an air stone because I don't have one.
Yeah.
And if it says Fermado or Fermade K, I use what I've got. Although now I do have some of that stuff now. I will try it one of these days. I promise, Ryan.
I sent you that a year and a half ago.
I know. I've made 2 batches since. I'm terrible.
I've got a pile of buckets sitting here and all the things I need to get a bunch of meads started, and I just have not had a chance. I'm hoping, since I'm basically going to be hovering in the house for the next several months, that I'm going to get the opportunity to get a few things done. But okay, yeah. So one of the things I've seen with people that are, especially when they're starting out, is they're always asking the question of, how high can I push the ABV?
Yeah.
And I look at that and I think, why? I mean, a high ABV is all fine and well and everything. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, there are so many things that can go wrong in the attempt to get there. You know,
That's absolutely correct. Go ahead.
especially as I say, especially if you're new. More experienced people, maybe not as much, but since yours are all like stupidly high. And he tries to kill people by not telling them that that's what it is, and they get drunk on the air. But
Funny that way.
yeah, it was funny, wasn't it? Y'all got a good laugh at my expense.
There are certain things. There are certain things that you cannot make well with a high ABV. And here's one of them. You're not going to be able to make a great traditional, in my opinion, where you want to have nice honey presence, you want to have a nice honey aroma, you want to have a nice honey expression in the mouth. If you go, I say shoot between 10 and 12 there and don't go any more than that. Otherwise, your alcohol is going to steal all of those things I just mentioned from your traditional, and it's not going to be a good representation of that honey.
And one of what made me think of it was we got a question from Kenneth over on the chat, and he was asking, how do I get a really big full body mouthfeel and a big ABV? And that got me to thinking, how many high ABV meads you see that really don't have that unless they're super sweet, And even then, they're so sweet that you forget to notice if there's a mouthfeel or not,
Well, so Kenneth, primarily where you're going to get your volume in your mouthfeel is going to be from your yeast selection. And if you didn't catch, I think it was 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, we did a thing on how to pick the correct yeast to make a mead.
Yeah,
we talked specifically about how to work inside of the Scott's Laboratory Handbook. Each and every one of those yeasts listed in there will tell you, the ones that do provide mouthfeel, it will tell you that. And so some yeast create polysaccharides, and that creates a lot of volume to the mouth, and other yeasts don't do that. And so if we go back to what we talked about earlier, where I do a lot of blending, generally I'll make a must, and not too often do I use a single strain of yeast. I don't blend them together in the same bucket, but I'll pick one yeast, perhaps, depending on what I'm building, one to give me mouthfeel. Maybe I want another one that'll give me some aroma, or maybe it'll give me some minerality or some pH or something. In other words, I can pick and choose my different yeast strains to give me a certain fraction that the other ones are not going to give to me, and then I can blend them back at the end of the day. So if you're looking for mouthfeel, you want to go look at the yeast strains that will provide that for you, and that'll be listed in the Scott's Laboratory Handbook. And then there's also some what they call SIY, specific inactivated yeasts, and some of them are made to design to boost and increase your aroma, and many of those are also designed to give you more mouth volume. And so that would be on page 38 in the book, is the specified yeasts, inactive yeast that you would use to either get aromas or mouth feel. Generally, that's the two things they do. Some of them do a little bit more than that. But that's what you need to look for to get a good volume in the mouth, particularly your yeast strain. High alcohols will also do that for you, but they have to be in balance with everything else, or it's going to be a detriment to what you're trying to create. And oak will also give you some different I won't say they'll necessarily give you volume, but they'll give you some different tactile experiences that may help to get what you're looking for in your mead. So get the handbook and become intimately familiar with that. I pretty much taught myself how to make meads for the most part. And the good part of what I learned all came out of that handbook. I've worn those stupid things out until I needed to get a new one because I read it too much. So that's your answer there, bud.
Okay, we have kind of an oddball question from Joe Vinciguerra. He's asking
Hey,
if,
Joe.
yeah, he's asking if anyone has experience at all with using oats, specifically without other grains, for body and enhancing carbonation. That was an interesting question. I've never played with oats, so I'm curious too. Have you?
I haven't either. I've read good things about them, but I personally have zero experience with it.
Sorry, Joe.
So, Joe, guess what, bud? You're the guy. You've got to go do that, and then you report back to us after
Yeah,
you've done that.
and then Joe, we'll have you on the show, and you can tell us about that.
That's right.
We'll have
That's right.
Dedicated episode to Joe's porridge mead. It'll be great.
Yeah, porridge
So in
mead.
your oats.
I think in this case the intention is to make a gluten-free beer-like substance, and there's a couple of recipes for stuff like that on Got Mead that I remember because I know someone was trying to do that a while ago.
Joe's response was crap. Sorry, Joe, we tried. Yeah, none of us have played with grains in our meads, unfortunately. So I guess we'll have to get somebody on who has. Actually, I was thinking about seeing about getting Sergio back on because he's been playing with beer style meads, so maybe he's done some of that. Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today because I've really enjoyed his.
Yeah, and I've talked to Steve Paddock, who I know there's a lot of people that I don't know of that make wonderful braggots, but I'm a personal friend with Steve, and he makes just fabulous braggots, and so I've asked him, and he said he would at some point get on and
Yay! Cool.
we
I
could
was
have a
going to
braggot
ask you to
show.
ask him. That would be great. I would love that.
Yeah, and not sure if he's used oats or not, but he would be a good guy to ask about for sure.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, unfortunately, that one was kind of a bust. So I guess we don't know everything, and we admit that readily enough.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So also another one from Kenneth. He was asking about. He commented about cherry pits. How much is too much for the woody tones? I don't know. Personally, I don't use the pits themselves. I use you guys have heard me talk about it often enough, Malab, which is the denatured cherry pits, which gives a really delightful woody / almost crust-like character. I've used it in my cherry melomels, and I love it because it adds a whole new tone to the mead that you can't get any other way.
Do you think that the Malab gives you that's different than what you'll get from the seeds themselves?
I think so because the Malab has had. I mean, you're not going to get sick from using cherry pits. I mean, you'd have to use pounds of cherry pits to get ill from them. But because there is that trace amount of, is it arsenic that's in cherry pits? I can never remember.
I think so.
Yeah, I can never remember.
I think it's arsenic.
It's cyanide.
Arsenic or cyanide.
Yeah, and apple seeds or whatever the other one is. Yeah. So anyway, I think that trace amount is going to add a trace flavor that, depending on how much you put in, is going to change the character of what you get with that versus Malab. So I kind of feel like you're getting more of the true unadulterated flavor cyanide. Okay. Hamish looked it up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, apparently you
I didn't look it up.
There you are.
There
There you are.
Listening.
Yeah. But I think that Malab gives you more of the true flavor of what the pits can deliver without the extra stuff that, I mean, even though it's just trace amounts of cyanide, nobody really wants cyanide of any amount in their mead because it does have a taste.
Yeah, it tastes like almonds.
Yeah, they say it tastes like almonds, but
it's really that almonds taste like cyanide. But anyway,
well, yeah.
There's a scary thought. But I mean,
That's
my personal opinion. But not having used cherry pits, this is an educated guess. That is all. And I'm gonna put that right out there. So I've only used them a lot.
I have used cherry pits a few times, and I only used about 20 to 25% of my fruit. I'll allow the pits to go in. So if I used 5 pounds of cherries, then I would allow 1 pound of cherries worth of seeds to be put in along with the fruit.
For cherry
As
pits,
far
do you
as I'm
crack
aware,
them or
it
you just
can't really-
leave them whole?
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
I just leave them whole. Yeah, I don't crack them, but
That's the other thing I liked about Malab is they're all cracked for you, so more surface area. You know?
Yeah.
oh,
So,
I always
I'm-
thought it was a powder.
No, this came in. The stuff I got was actually sold to be used as like a salad sprinkler thing. It was in chunks, you know, about the size of like crushed
uh-huh.
almonds, you know. So, it was in pieces. I've never seen powder.
I see. So they get
Yeah.
they get rid of the hard shell and then just keep the nut inside.
Well, yes and no. I mean, they were all broken up into little bitty pieces. They weren't powder, but they
Mhm.
were like little,
Right.
you know, like the size of a sunflower seed, busted up.
Uh-huh. I see.
Joe is saying don't crack them all in caps.
Yeah. So, as far as I'm aware, there are no great health risks with regards to using pits of any kind. You can't get a quantity that will upset you. Of course, you know, onus is on you. Please don't take my word for that. But when you look at things like a almond slice or almond fingers that you can buy, those hard cake type things, they only have like half a percent of almond in them, and the rest of them is apricot kernels. Because an almond kernel, which is what you're eating, is very similar to an apricot kernel, to a peach kernel, to a cherry pit. They're all very similar. So if you want that flavor, you can just leave the pits in, and the alcohol and fermentation process will absorb some of that flavor. If you want to amplify that flavor, then what you'll find is that the stone inside the fruit is in fact the outside of the nut, and you have to crack that open like you would a normal nut to get the edible piece inside rather than the big woody bit. So it really depends on what the flavor is that you're aiming for. So definitely get your nutcracker out, open them up, taste the seeds, work out what you want to do. Do you want the woody flavor of the husk of the nut in your meat at all? It's really it all comes down to your own taste in that regard.
There you go.
Yeah, I found leaving. I do a lot of stuff with second runs, or did when I was really active in the brewing. And I found that if you leave stuff that's got seeds in it for too long, you end up getting this woody flavor. But sometimes that ages out. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does.
Next question.
Vicky, where are the questions?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I've been reflexively muting whenever somebody else is talking because the dogs are pitter-pattering around. No, that's all the questions that we've got right now. AJ, you had written something on the question list at the beginning, but I think you already talked about that?
Yeah, we already covered that.
Okay.
So what I'm getting from what you're saying, Ryan, is that you start planning a recipe knowing what you've got, and you have a meat in mind when you plan your recipe, but you say sort of don't be committed to that in case it goes in a different direction, follow it and see where it goes.
Yes. Exactly.
So then how do you suggest people figure out what they want? Because, like, that's always been my biggest thing. Like, I'll just do stuff and see how it turns out rather than knowing what I want in advance and trying to go towards a goal.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I guess there's different ways that we all get our different inspiration. When I first learned about mead and actually realized that I could make some myself, what a novel idea, right? And then I started to understand I could kind of point and aim and shoot at different flavors or combinations of flavors and whatnot. I started paying much more attention to ethnic foods, desserts. I would wander the aisles like specialty cook shops and stuff, and I would look at all the jams and jellies, look at all the flavors that they would combine them with. And when I started doing that, I found all the time I'm going, oh, I want to see if I can make a mead that tastes like that. And oh, that'd be cool if you could make a mead that tastes like that. And before you knew it, I had tons of different meads that I wanted to try to make, that I wanted to try to emulate, something else, either that I really enjoyed or that I thought, wow, it's going to be really hard to do that. I wonder how I can get that piece and that piece. And so some of them would be more of a challenge, and then others would be, an enticing carrot to say, "Ooh, come make me." So, desserts, ice creams, ethnic foods, just anything that I like. I think
Go ahead. Sorry,
I think what we wanted to try to do is. Yeah, what I was hoping to do tonight, it doesn't look like we're going to really get started at all tonight, and that's fine. I'm happy to, and it might even end up being a 2-part show next time if we get started on it. I find that, and please, you guys, I know some of us fly by the seat of our pants, and we're comfortable at not having rules and regulations and following a structure. And I know some of you guys would you just cringe inside and go, oh my God, if I don't have step-by-step rules, I'm going to die. And so I get that. I'm not picking on you guys that I'm a very much totally comfortable with flying at the seat of my pants. That's who I am. And I don't work well inside of a regimented system, and everything's got to, so, but what I wanted to try to do is, I think and I understand you have to start somewhere. Unfortunately, I think that my encouragement to everybody would be the sooner you can move beyond, give me a recipe, please, and start making your own stuff up. I think you'll enjoy much more what you're making, because you're actually creating something yourself, and just instead of following a mathematic equation is how I kind of see it. So if you really need that recipe, I understand, but hopefully what I wanted to try to do was to teach us how to move away from that recipe and sit down and create our own recipe. And then, as Vicki just pointed out, just because we thought we were making one thing, if it starts to go in a different direction, go with it. Just run with it. See where it takes you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of requests here from another Ryan B,
sure,
on the chat, and
okay.
they're not questions.
Ryan Bush, yeah.
They're not questions, but he
okay.
says, tell us about your biggest recipe fails when you were learning. That's a good question. That's a good.
Okay, yeah. So would have been 3 years ago. Right around now, I wanted to make a sizer. Of course, apples are in right now, cider's in, and I made. In fact, it's a very good recipe, even though I don't like doing recipes per se. I found a recipe online, and I followed it to the T. I was at that place where I was happy and able to kind of delve around and play it after I got the recipe part going on, and then I would, do the chef thing. I think what we really are here doing when we make mead is we're liquid chefs.
Yeah, we're cooking.
And the better that we understand, we're cooking with liquids. Exactly. So, Ryan, to answer your question, I made a sizer that tasted very nice, and I was in Whole Foods one night, and they had a great big oak barrel, and I'm sure it had a plastic liner in it or something, but they had mulling spices for sale. And, you open that up or stick your face down in there and go, oh, man, that smells wonderful. And so I thought, ooh, I'm going to go put some mulling spices in my cider. This will be perfect, right? Well, I've never been one to get on the internet and go, well, how many, how much of this should I just like, well, put some in there and then pull it out when you like it. And that's always been my thing. I really have a hard time answering people. And some guy just the other day asked me something about a specific thing. And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't even have a clue how much I used. I just put some in until it was where I wanted it, and I took it back out.
Yeah, that's
So
what
I
did, too.
bought,
Mm.
I bought probably a couple cups of this mulling spices, and I had never used cloves before, and I didn't know how powerful a clove was, and so I had a 3-gallon batch of really nice cider. It tasted like an apple pie, and I probably put 2 cups of this mulling spice in there.
Oh, good Lord.
So that's 2 cups of
Oh,
2
dear.
cups of mulling spice in a 3-gallon batch.
Oh, dear.
I'm quite certain there was probably at least 40 or 50 cloves in that stuff.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah,
God.
it was so
Interestingly,
strong.
just as a side point here, when I made one of my best meads ever, I used a couple of cups of a chai spice, which I guess is not much different to a mulling spice, but I made a tea out of it first, and it was perfect. So I'm guessing if you're talking about putting 2 cups in the primary, is that correct?
No, I actually put 2 dry cups in a little bag and dangled it inside my vessel in secondary and just let it extract. So I had no idea how powerful cloves were. This was my first time ever using, I think, probably any spices other than maybe a little bit of cinnamon, nutmeg, that kind of stuff, allspice. Well, in fact, this now that I think about it, this sizer did have those apple pie spices in there. Probably exactly that: cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg, and vanilla. And I actually made it with clover honey too. Well, so when I got around to tasting this, it was just so over the top clover that I thought. And this also too, they always tell you don't ever throw anything away. And I'm thinking, my God, I can't imagine this gasoline is ever going to taste better. And the ferment was nice. It tasted good until I put the mulling spices in there. And at that point, I thought, man, you could put this into one of those pump up little spray bottles and use it to kill your ants around the house instead. It was just way, way, way over the top.
Yeah, but spices fade with age.
Well, and I didn't even know
Sometimes.
that for sure. This is one of my first learning experiences of how things, fade to the back over a period of time. And so I did what you learn as a beginner to do, and I just buried it away, and I actually made it with clover honey too. Well, so I called this particular mead, I like to name my meads, I called this one Clover Dose.
That's a really good name.
It was a perfect name for it, right? I'll tell you what, it's as way, way, way over the top as that was with cloves. A year later, it was one of the best meads at that time in my life that I had ever made in my entire life. It was just magical. Probably the first thing I ever made that was magical.
Nice.
And I was blown away how over a year's period of time, or it maybe even have been a little bit longer than that. I don't remember exactly, but it was a long time, especially at that point when, even 6 months was a long time to a new mead maker. And it really turned out really, really nicely done at the end of the day, but I think I was quite fortunate. And that's probably, I'm sure, my biggest mistake as far as, a recipe, ingredients type of thing. I made another big mistake, although in a different way. I made I don't remember now if it was a 3 or a 5 gallon batch of a traditional with cranberry blossom honey, I think from Michigan. And it just, for whatever reasons, as a traditional, it didn't end up where I wanted it to be. And so I let it sit for a while. It didn't change much. It didn't really get any better. And I couldn't come up with that was probably the only time I was truly stumped. What am I going to do with this? I'm not getting any hints of where it wants to go. And so I thought, well, this is an awesome thing to do with my mead club that we have. We get together and So I found out how many people wanted to play the game, and our next meeting I took down, I think I brought everybody that wanted to do this a half a gallon, and the rules were done. Take this home, do whatever you want with it to make it better or different, or, here's your chance to learn how to rescue something. And everybody took theirs home, and we have a lot of really good mead makers in our group, but I don't remember anybody bringing back anything that was memorable. I.e., I don't remember anything, right? Nobody, I don't think anybody really was able to do too much with that, including myself. And so I stuck the rest away and let it, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to shove it in the corner until it tells me something that's going to help me to decide what to do with it. And again, this was quite a long period of time. It might have been 8 to 10 months before I tasted it good. And when I went back then and tasted it, it was wonderful. I'm like, what a mistake to go give so much of this away, to mess it all up when all this was needed was more time. And so I've been since learned that even though rarely do I ever make any meads that have fusels or any of those, none of those big glaring problems that you start out with. Generally, everything tastes quite nice right out of the fermenter. Unlike a lot of people, I drink this stuff, probably every time I take a gravity reading. I'm well familiar with my things through the entire process. I think I can learn more about making mead and maybe you just learn more. You can taste something and you got an idea where it's headed and where it's going to go. And so that now has made me be able to taste things and go, I think I know what this is going to taste like once all the sugar's fermented out of it. Right. And
yeah.
So anyway, this is the only other mistake that I can think of that was really a mistake, if you will, is I punted too early on this batch, and for whatever reasons, it just seemed to take quite a long while to come around to what ended up at the end of the day to be a very nice traditional. And so now I've learned to be even more patient, and I don't think I ever bottle anything under a year old now. And I've just learned that even though it tastes good out of the fermenter, so to speak, some things change a lot more than others do over time, before they kind of set into the pocket where they're standing up and showing what they really are.
And I'm a big fan of bulk aging anyway. I mean,
yeah.
I apologize for the growling you might be able to hear. The dogs all of a sudden decided to start wrestling in the room. But I have found that you get a lot more consistent, because it's bulk, it's all together. So you get a lot more consistent aging than if you, spread it across 2 cases of bottles, and who knows what's going to happen then.
Yeah.
So I've
Me
always
too.
been, if you've got the containers, do it,
I hate bottling. I've got so many kegs, or not kegs, but cases at my brother's and a bunch of cases here at my house, and anymore I'll just rather go buy a keg and just put it in a keg and let it sit forever in a keg. You can age it nicely. You can keep it from becoming exposed to oxygen by purging it with your CO2, and it's not going to break. It's not going to.
Yeah.
I hate bottling. I just really, really hate bottling. And so now anymore, the only time I bottle is when I want to take something somewhere or gift somebody some, and then I'll just, bottle right out of my kegs or carboys.
If I had room for kegs, I'd probably do that, because bottling right now is the reason I don't have any carboy space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I can't be arsed to bottle any of it.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're going to have...
I like how...
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I like how a keg only takes up 8 inches of your floor space, and you can put 25 of them in your walk-in closet underneath your shirts and pants. And
I might have to go buy some
That's
kegs.
that's where my closet's like. They're all full of buckets of honey and kegs underneath all my clothes everywhere.
That's hilarious.
Hmm.
I think my husband might actually, have words for that if I started stashing kegs all over the house.
Well, I'm single, and so I have that that added benefit, if you will, of not having to answer to anybody else about living in a dream.
I could get away with it. I would just have to make room in the basement, and that's gonna have to wait until I can make room in the basement. So
Hmm.
we're in
Yeah,
in
my house is
purge.
full of
So
crap.
yeah. I'm in purge mode. So every time I free up a space, it tends to get filled up with bottles of somebody else's mead. So as it is, I need to
I
build
don't
more
have.
shelf space for bottled mead to have that stored.
I keep trying. I don't have a purge mode. It doesn't work. It's broken on this model.
So Ryan also asked Ryan B, who I think that Ryan is that Ryan Bush? Ryan B? I don't know. Might be.
Yeah,
Yeah. I assumed
should
it
be.
is.
That's the
Yeah.
only other Ryan.
That's the only other
He and
Ryan
I
I know that
he and I
hangs
are
out in our
friends, actually.
circles. Yeah. Oh, okay. He
Yeah, we
also.
talked on the phone together.
Oh, okay. He also asked to, what was your most unexpected flavor combination that worked well for you? So something that you weren't planning for.
So, yeah, I know what the adjunct was that I would have never guessed. Let me think just a minute. Oh, I made so let me put a quick little interlude in here. I'm not one. I realize you can do this and probably can do it successfully. And so, first off, I'll say I understand this, but I'll also say I'm not an advocate of just thinking that you can go and put together a bunch of leftover crap and make a good mead. You might if the leftover crap happens to work well with each other, but I don't really give a whole lot of credit to kind of a haphazard, I'm just going to slap this crap together and think that it's going to be a good mead. Certainly that can happen, and if the better you are at doing what we wanted to teach tonight, the better you're going to get. But with that said, I'm quite specific where when I think about what I'm going to make, I'm going to think about my adjuncts. I'm going to think about what kind of honey that's going to want to sit with. I'm going to think about what kind of yeast that wants to go with, and all spices and all of those things. And so I have all of that plotted down on a piece of paper before I decide that I want to make it. And keep in mind, I'm embarrassed to see how much honey I have sitting around the house, and not a lot of fruit, but I've got a lot in my pantry, so to speak, that I can already work with. But so, with all that said, there was a time just must have been the beginning. It must have been last spring. I had. Here's an example of a bad mistake I did once, and I'm getting to your question here, Ryan. I bought at the end of the year last year. We have a place called Palisade. It's a town on the western slope of the mountains, about 2.5 hours away from here if the weather's nice. It's a wonderful orchard town. They have that's where all the Colorado, for the most part, all the Colorado wines are. The vineyards are there and all of the orchards. And probably like many of you have local fruits that they really, this is the bomb, right? You got this, I don't know, cantaloupe from Rocky Ford, and we've got this corn from here. Well, we've got Palisade peaches, these peaches that are grown in Palisade, and they are extremely good peaches, and I've never bought any that were not good. It was the last week of the farmer's market. It was the last week of farmer's market last year, and I hadn't got around to buying any Palisade peaches. And as you all know, it takes a boatload of peaches to get very much peach flavor. One thing I didn't realize that there's a couple different kinds of peaches that they grow over in Palisade, and so I thought a Palisade peach was a Palisade peach. I stopped at the farmer's market, and I walked around and talked to 2 or 3 of the trucks there that had peaches, and I think if I remember right, I wanted 10 boxes. So I don't know, what is that, 200 pounds? I don't know, but I wanted 10 full big boxes. Found one guy that would sell them to me, and so like an idiot, I bought all 10 boxes of these peaches without tasting one. I felt it, I squeezed it. Yeah, well, that's number one. Don't be an idiot. Don't do that. Taste what you're going to buy. I bought 10 boxes. I took them home and I tasted them. I cut one open and it was horrible. I'm like, oh my God, what did I just do? It just tasted like crap. It was dry and grainy. And there was no juice. There was no sweetness. It didn't even leak like a peach. I mean, it was just grainy. And I thought, oh shit, I just bought 200 pounds of crap peaches. And it was cool enough because we were moving into winter that the days weren't very warm yet and the nights were still cool. And so I have a extended cab pickup, and I had 5 boxes times 2 in the back of my cab of my extended cab truck. Well, I thought, I'm just going to let these peaches sit inside here. They're not going to get too warm in the daytime. They're not going to get too cold at night, and I'll see if they'll ripen a little bit and come good. Well, I waited and I waited and I waited, and they started to get a little bit like, they're going to have to hurry up or I'm going to be tossing them. Long story short, 5 days later, I ended up tossing all but 2 boxes in the dumpster. Yeah, and I was just sick, and I was pissed at myself for being so stupid to buy 200 pounds of fruit without even tasting it. I did take the two things home, and I let them sit around just another day or two, and almost in like 36 hours, they went from being total garbage to not so bad. And so I ended up, I actually kept the skins this year. This was last year. I kept the skins. I cut them all up so I could make better use of some space, and I put them in some plastic kitchen trash can plastic bags, and I put them in my freezer, and it filled up my freezer. Well, after having them in the freezer for all winter long, I said, damn it, I'm just going to make something with these to get them out of here, because I didn't have any room for other fruits that I was now starting to buy. So I made a peach mellow mill. I bochetted some honey with it. So it was a bochetted peach mill, and it was actually pretty good. It was lacking the magic, but it was actually not bad. And one day I went to an Asian market. Here's again, you were asking earlier, where do you find your inspiration? I go to Asian markets and I buy all this weird stuff that I don't even know what it is. I don't have a clue what it is, but I'm going to go home and see if this is going to make me something or not. And so while I was there, I bought some grapefruits, and I'd never seen this kind of grapefruit. They just smelled so amazingly unreal that just 10 or 12 of them in my house, you'd open the door and say, oh my God, this is a grapefruit orchard in here. It was just amazing. And so I wanted to add some citric. I wanted to pick up my mead mel a little bit, kind of spice it up, kind of brighten it up, waken it up, so to speak. And I don't know why, but I just decided I'm going to zest a bunch of these grapefruits. And so I zested probably 8 or 10 of them, and they were big grapefruits. I zested them all and juiced them all, and I threw all that in my peach mellow milk carboy. And it was just amazingly good. Like total Magic City to the bone. It was like, wow. Can I go buy some more shit peaches and some grapefruits at the Asian store? And so that's probably my biggest shocker of a combination of things that worked exceptionally well. And I don't know what made me pick that, except somehow inertly, and is it inertly? That's not the right word.
Inadvertently.
Instinctively.
Yeah, inadvertently. I just somehow, I probably just as you gain more experience, you get more hunch, so to speak, and that hunch really worked super well, and I don't think, in your mind that doesn't make too much sense to mix grapefruits and peaches together, but it works.
Yeah, you'd think the grapefruit would way overpower the peaches.
Yeah. So that's my biggest weird combination of stuff that worked exceedingly well. In fact, if you guys, or Ryan, if you're going to come to Mazer this year, or AJ and Vicky, remind me, and I'll bring some of that to share at Mazer.
Yes.
I don't have very much left, but if I remember, I'll bring some down for people to try.
Putting that one in my notes. Remind Ryan to bring.
Remind Ryan to bring that stuff.
There you go.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have to do a mead recipes part 2, because we ended up getting a lot more questions than we thought we were going to get that led us down a lot of rabbit holes. But that's okay, because things were learned, so that's the whole idea. But we can do a part 2 if you want to.
Well, in fact, we didn't even get to the first chapter in part 1,
really,
so we can call it.
All right, so what we've got.
Well, we got the preamble out of the way.
Yeah.
We're in good shape for next time.
Ryan's
Yeah.
saying,
Perfect.
Ryan Bush is saying, my bad. No, you were just one of them, Ryan. Yeah, there were several.
Yeah,
they were all good questions, though.
They were, and I think we had a productive night, even though it. Again, here, perfect example, huh? We didn't end up where we were going to shoot for when we started, but we went with what we had, and it worked, I think.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Still ended up in a good place.
Exactly. So,
right.
We got a lot of audience participation, and that is always a good thing. So,
that's all. You guys don't know how much we beg for audience participation. Number one, almost everything that I've ever done on these podcasts, it's been the first time I've taught them. I've had the opportunity to be a public speaker and a teacher in different places and aspects in my life, so that's not strange to me. But to sit and talk on the phone to nobody, if that makes sense, to an unseen audience, when I first started, it was kind of strange, and there's been often times. Specifically, what I think of is when I wanted to try to teach us how to create a sense of balance, so that all of our different teeter-totters were in the air, instead of one side up in the sky and the other one down on the ground. I felt oftentimes like if we only had some more participation from the audience, it would help things out significantly. And so tonight's been great, and we really want to welcome all you guys to participate. It helps so much when you do, and so thank you for all of your participation tonight, and let's keep that coming. This is really for you guys, and your input makes a big difference. It's like playing in a band. If you're playing in the band and nobody out there in the stadium, only played in the stadium twice, if nobody in the stands are paying any attention to you, it's kind of hard sometimes to get the music going. But as entertainers, you really feed off of the crowd, and the crowd can double or triple what they get back from the people when they participate. And I think that in a different way, that holds true here as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, well, we've got Pete next week, so we'll have to do part 2 after that.
Nice.
Yeah. So.
What's he going to talk about? I asked him a long time ago to do some shows, and he never got back to me. So you must have grabbed him. Do you know what he's going to talk on?
I can be more pitiful than you. He keeps forgetting to tell me.
All right,
It hardly
cool.
matters. It's Pete. It'll be great.
I know Pete's.
Yeah, it'll be great no matter what.
I call him Master.
Yeah.
I call him Master Pete all the time.
Oh, yeah. He knows
He's
so
the
much,
master for
and it
sure.
cracks me up when he says something in one or the other of the mead groups, and somebody comes back with, "What do you know?" And I'm like, "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?"
What do you know? Like
I
everything.
know,
Shut
right?
up.
Yeah,
And I was like,
yeah.
Shut up,
I
Grasshopper.
forgot.
yeah.
I forgot more than you'll ever know times a hundred
Mhm.
hundred lifetimes.
Yeah, he was like born to
Yeah.
this, literally, I mean, it was so yeah. I have pinged him and reminded him again to to tell me,
Uh-huh.
hey, I gave him some ideas and things I thought people would find interesting, and he's like, I'm not sure. I'll let you know. And then I went to Disney, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him since I got back.
Poke him again.
Yeah,
Right.
I just did
Right.
actually, so he's still up. It's a lot earlier on the left coast, so um
Yeah.
we'll see what he says, but I don't know. He may not be up. He goes to bed fairly early because he works like ridiculous hours. But he'll get back to me fairly quick. So yeah. Anyway, so okay, guys. For those of you that are like, "Hey, what about how to make recipes?" We're still doing that. Part 2 is coming um, in 2 weeks. So if you can, Ryan, can you do 2 weeks from now? Not next Tuesday, but Tuesday after.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
And
week after
all right.
next, then Ryan is going to come back and we're going to pick this up where we left off and hopefully stay on track this time.
We'll pick up where we never even started.
Where we never even got to. Yeah, because we had such amazing
You-
questions. We had good questions and
That's
that
right. That's right.
led us into other discussions, and that's okay too. So, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll dig into that. So, all right. So, we're as usual over. So,
Yep.
um, so
Not
for
much
those
over, but over.
not much over, but over. So for those of you that don't already know, hotel reservations are now open for the Mazer Cup and AMMA MeadCon. Go to meadcon.net/venue. You can get reservations for both events there. It's the same link for both events, and the discounted rates are open now. So also tickets are available for the MeadCon. Meadcon.net, and just look for the button that says "Buy your tickets," and you can reserve your tickets. There is a limit to how many people we can fit into the space. So if you're planning on coming, I recommend early, and you get cheaper rates if you buy early as opposed to waiting until last minute. Just saying. So anyway, we'll see you in March. Coming up, we've got well, a bunch of different stuff actually. November 1st, we've got St. Ambrose Cellars has a Thirsty Thursday open mic night. Don't say that when you've been drinking. Um, also on November 1st, Boss Meadery has Mead to Laugh, so they're going to have a comedy show. November 3rd, Southwest Michigan Wine, Hops, and Harvest Festival. November 7th, Shuli's Cuisine and Events is putting on a cider and mead pairing dinner. November 10th and 11th, Starlight Meadery has their grand opening celebration. They built a whole new facility. It is amazing. If
Oh,
you are
cool.
anywhere near Central North Carolina, I highly recommend that you attend. I plan to be there. So, with any luck, I won't catch a stupid cold this time and I'll get to go.
Jeez.
November 17th, Boss Meadery has their progressive dinner. And then this one's a ways out, but tickets are on sale now, so I figured I'd better let people know. There is a meadery bus tour being put on in Royal Oak, Michigan to go to some of the meaderies in southeast Michigan. So if you're in that vicinity and that sounds like fun to you, hop on a bus and go visit meaderies. Sounds like fun to me.
That
January
sounds like
19th.
fun.
Yeah, and the links are on the are on the show page for this episode so that you can click straight through to that stuff. So, and as we said, Pete Bakulich will be on next week, and he actually just texted me back. So he said that he's still twiddling and he's gonna let me know. So I should probably know something by tomorrow. So I'll post up some teasers. But Pete Bakulich is going to be on next week, and then the week after we're going to have Ryan back so that we can like pick up where we never got to on creating your recipes. Now that we've gotten some of the technical stuff handled that people came up with for questions. So, um, you know, plan on being here. That should be a pretty good show. We'll be talking about how you can pull stuff together. I love to cook, so this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So we should have a lot of fun with this. So that's what I got. You got anything?
Nope, just a bunny telling me to get off the air.
Yeah, my dogs are all pitter-pattering around going, Mom, aren't you done yet? All right, guys.
He actually
so...
tried to push my headset off. That was impressive.
Oh, okay. He's really telling you then. All right, kids. So
Yeah.
we'll see you back next time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Don't forget this coming Sunday morning is the clock change in the United States. So if you're listening,
Right.
yeah. So if you're listening from something other than Eastern time or from another country, especially Australia, it's going to be different next week. So we'll make sure to put something up about that so that people are aware and we don't have folks missing out on the broadcast because of the time change. So we'll see you next week
Right.
at 9 p.m. Eastern, not daylight time, and we will talk with Pete and see what happens. So we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Night, everybody.
Night.